Pretty much every day I use Twitter, I use YouTube, I use Zoom, I use Discord, I use Slack, and I even use Teams. Yuck. And that's a lot of apps. What if X could subsume them all? Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. This is a bit of a selfish episode because I'm thinking about the number of different apps that I use in kind of a social aspect to get work done or to just socialize with friends or things like that. And I realized that there are at least 6 apps that I use on mostly a daily basis. Teams not so much, because I really dislike Teams. So I only use it when other people force me to, like other businesses and things. But the other ones I use a lot and I really enjoy them. But the problem is that you're constantly context switching and also paradigm switching. They all operate in a somewhat different manner from each other. And there's the question of like, where is this thing that I was talking about with another person, whether it was social or business related or something like that. So I thought I would kind of run down the major apps that we're talking about here and then discuss what Elon Musk's plans might be with X Corporation to absorb all of these different paradigms into one Uber app. And of course, whether that's a good idea or not. So first I'm going to run down the use cases and the sort of major paradigm methodology of using each of these types of applications. I'm going to call them kind of quasi-social media. I mean, some of them are more work related and some are more social media related. For me, they're all kind of blending together now because work and social media have become very much intertwined for me. But anyway, starting with Twitter. Twitter, of course, is much more of a town hall, large group discussion sort of paradigm that we're talking about. Now, of course, there are things like Twitter circles and stuff like that where you can kind of reduce the scope of the conversation to a much smaller group of people, but I don't believe that most people use Twitter in that type of context right now. I could be wrong about that, but at least I don't. Of course, you also have things like Spaces and so forth. So the primary way of dealing with Twitter is text with GIFs or still frame pictures or things like that. The secondary way of using Twitter is to use an audio interface using Twitter Spaces. I predict that there will soon be a video version of that as well, of Video Spaces, because that's a logical outgrowth of where things are going. So Twitter, at least for me, is more of a public-facing sort of thing where you're sort of out there talking to a large group of people. And again, primarily text and image based at this point. All right, on to YouTube. YouTube is a bit more traditional in a sense. I mean, it is one of the oldest of these things that's been out there for a long time. I know Twitter's been out for a long time too, but it was set up differently. But anyway, YouTube, the idea is it's a television station by you, right? It's your tube. That's basically in the name. But what I do, of course, is I create videos like this and I broadcast them out to a large group of people. I don't know who that's going to be, but it's whoever wants to watch that. Then those people can comment back and I can get feedback from that and I can alter future videos or things like that. But it's less of a full-on conversation, more of a one-way sort of thing where I'm blabbing at you about my thoughts about things, right? So I'm sure anybody who watches YouTube and this video on YouTube will understand that. Now on to Zoom. Zoom is primarily a video conferencing app. They have tacked on a whole bunch of stuff over the past couple of years, but that is their core functionality. So that's the kind of thing where if I have a meeting with students, where I have a meeting with a class, if I have a meeting with people all around the world for business purposes or for social purposes, I do that as well. Although I do tend to use FaceTime on my phone a little bit more for social purposes. So Zoom is primarily business focused. Of course, I also use Zoom to record my YouTube interactions with other people as well. So it ties into YouTube as well. But the primary functionality of Zoom is clearly a video conferencing sort of thing. So it's real-time audio video conversation that happens between relatively small groups of people. Yes, you can use Zoom to broadcast out a presentation or something as well, but the primary functionality is clearly people who are not co-located geographically having small group conversations with each other. Then on to Slack. I use Slack a lot for classes and also for business purposes to keep track of what's going on. Its primary interface, again, is more text and graphics based. So you primarily, type in something to somebody else, and then you can put in pictures, you can load in documents, you can talk about that kind of a thing. The general usability for that, for me at least, is again much more of a business case sort of situation, not something that I tend to do a lot with social interactions, more business interactions with my co-founder for my company, Artomatic, also for my classes and things like that. So it's a good backup for that. It allows for some agility in what you're working on because you can keep up without having to have a meeting all the time. You can type in what you're doing right now and you can pivot, you can do all sorts of things. Again, the interface is more or less like Twitter at this point, where it's primarily text and graphics based, and you type something and you put in a picture or a document or something, and then somebody else responds to that. So it's a smaller group, more localized version of Twitter where you have threads that you can keep track of things and maintain records of what's going on. Next up is Discord, and Discord is kind of a weird beastie. That's right. I've got my Patreon Discord channel and we have a lot of fun having conversations and so forth. But then of course I'm also on Discord for Midjourney, for OpenAI, for a whole bunch of other groups of entities that are out there to have conversations. And Discord, for me at least, is a much less formal system. It's something that's very, very off the cuff. It's very conversational with other people, at least in the small group for my personal Discord channel. For the other ones, they tend to be a little overwhelming and I tend to be much more of a lurker on that, but I can use it as a knowledge base. And of course with Midjourney, I can type in /imagine and I can have it generate images for me as I want to. So it's a really interesting interface. Obviously it came from gaming. That was where the original purpose of Discord was for, but it's grown out to be a much, much larger thing. I've also discovered that my students who are in their early 20s, late teens, much prefer Discord over Slack. They really like the more interactive type of methodology for it. And again, the sort of general usability of Discord tends to be text and images, things like that. Now, of course, again, they also have things like voice channels and they have all sorts of other stuff that's tacked on, but the primary functionality of that is text and image based. And then finally we have Teams, and like I said, I do not prefer Teams. I use it as little as possible, but for people who use Teams more primarily, of course, it does have the text and graphics based thing, but then it also has the Zoom functionality of a voice and video conversation with small groups of people. So it attempts to subsume several of these. Probably Slack and Zoom would be the two biggest competitors, and obviously Microsoft has taken a lot of market share from those two other products, but that's the sort of competitive landscape for Teams. So we've got these 6 disparate products that do have a lot of overlap, but also do different things better and worse than each other. So there is a tendency, at least for me, I use all of these things except for Teams daily, and I do use Teams weekly at least. So the good part about this is each one has a focus, each one has something it's really particularly good at. The bad part about it is context switching. Number one, context switching is the mind killer. It's a terrible, terrible thing to have to keep context switching, but also if you want to have sort of one threaded sort of entity of what's going on with a particular conversation or with your business or something, suddenly you're looking at 2 or 3 different places and going like, where did I have a conversation about that? Where was that particular document? All of those sorts of things. So there is the context switching between the different applications. There's the paradigm switching between the way that they operate, so that you have to kind of context switch that as well. But then perhaps more fundamentally than that is the fact that it's difficult to keep track of where particular things are because we've got different applications where all of these things are stored. So that brings us to X, and X Corporation is something that Elon Musk created in principle many, many years ago, but has sort of resurrected with the purchase of Twitter, and Twitter is now part of X.com, part of that, larger thing, just like Google is now part of Alphabet. So you can see that there's a future in which Elon Musk wants to expand Twitter into a much larger entity, which, like he says, one app to rule them all, that kind of a thing. So in order to do that, it's going to have to absorb all of these different applications within itself. So let's see how Twitter does with all of this, or the eventual X application. Since currently X is Twitter, we can just give that a pass and we can say it already does that perfectly well, because there's no reason to, change that, because that's the way it works. So let's turn next to YouTube. And clearly Twitter is making inroads into YouTube. In fact, what I'm going to do with this video is I'm going to A/B test it. I'm going to release it simultaneously on YouTube and Twitter and see what the response is. My personal prediction is I will get somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 views on YouTube. It will not perform particularly well because it's not something that's that interesting. And then on Twitter, it's going to do to at least multiples of that, say 20 or 30,000 views or something. If Elon Musk happened to retweet this or like it or something, then all bets are off. It would be much, much bigger. But at the very least, we can certainly see how Twitter is directly competing with YouTube at this point. Now, the interesting thing about YouTube, and the reason why I put stuff on YouTube, is because it makes a lot more money than Twitter does right now. Twitter has a subscriber-only feature, which means that people pay to play essentially, and you create exclusive content, that sort of thing, and that generates a certain amount of money for me without being too clear about that. YouTube currently generates about 20x per interaction that Twitter does. So it's an order of magnitude larger than Twitter. So currently there's no question that I need to produce things on YouTube in order to make a reasonable return on the investment of time and so forth. There is also the fact that currently YouTube has a much better algorithm for discovering and finding things. So as a user of YouTube, as opposed to a content creator, I find it very, very useful because it will feed me things that I am interested in watching. And as it's primarily a video-based entity, it is designed to do that really, really well. Can Twitter catch up with this? Absolutely. I mean, this is Twitter's early days. It's just, Elon Musk bought it back in October, so it hasn't even been a year yet, and they're just rolling these features out. So all of this stuff will get settled out, and I believe that Twitter will become a very powerful competitor to YouTube, but it's going to take on the order of a year to 2 years to really ramp that stuff up and also get the amount of videos that YouTube already has. I mean, that's one of the other things, is that YouTube just has a legacy of a gigantic amount. They have a warehouse of videos sitting in their servers right now. So it's going to take a while for Twitter to gather momentum and gain some of that to be able to compete effectively with YouTube. As far as the functionality and paradigm, I think that Twitter definitely has an advantage over YouTube in that, because of course I can post a video, or you can post a video or something on Twitter, and there's an immediate conversation, and it's a very easy conversation to have, as opposed to the Twitter comments, which are complicated. I mean, they're not complicated, obviously they're right there, but there's lots and lots of comments. They don't tend to be threaded well. That part of it doesn't work nearly as well with YouTube as it does with Twitter. So I think that Twitter is going to have a major advantage on that part, because that's what Twitter is good at already. And now on to Zoom. Currently Twitter has, Twitter circles, but even Elon Musk admits it's not that great right now. So I think that there's going to be a Circles 2.0 or something like that to be able to compete with something like Zoom. Remember again that Zoom's core functionality is video conferencing, and it's exceptionally good at it. It's amazing with poor internet connections and stuff how well it does. So this is something that's not just creating a front end for it, but actually creating an entire software stack and everything. In all honesty, there is a sense in which it might make sense for an entity like Twitter or X to purchase Zoom, because I don't think their valuation is all that high, and they could get a lot of the core intellectual property that's buried in Zoom. So in a way, that might be the fastest way to get to Zoom, is just to absorb Zoom. But the way that Zoom works is fundamentally different than Twitter. I mean, it's a full screen app. It takes over the whole thing. Could you roll that into Twitter, or would it need to be its own app, something like Zoom spelled with an X instead of a Z? That would be kind of cool. But if you didn't want to context switch between apps, how would you roll that into the Twitter app itself? You would probably have to have some sort of like mini sub app or something like that that would pop up a more or less full screen display where you could then pick the people that you wanted to be in this conference. This is fundamentally different than Spaces. Spaces, again, is primarily audio at this point, but even disregarding that, it's more of a town hall thing where you have a panel of speakers and then a whole bunch of listeners. And the idea of Zoom is much more on a small group scale, right? You just got a few people down to just 2 people having a conversation. And of course, as opposed to Spaces, which just takes up a small part of your phone screen or could just be run in the corner of your computer screen, Zoom tends to be a kind of a full screen experience. And that's actually a positive for Zoom. You don't want a lot of distractions during these types of meetings. So Twitter would have to create some sort of sub app within itself that would become full screen and get rid of a lot of the distractions so that you could interact with other people without everything else going off at the same time. And then we get to Discord, and weirdly enough, in some ways, Discord is the easiest thing for Twitter to disrupt, and in other ways, I think it actually is the hardest. So Discord, of course, like I said, is text and image based primarily, and guess what? So is Twitter. So that seems like a a really, really easy crossover that Twitter could take over. But Discord has a very interesting vibe. It's got kind of a youthful, energetic vibe with a lot of off-the-cuff comments and more personal again, because remember that Discord is a smaller group of people, generally speaking. I mean, if you get on Midjourney, it's billions of people, and I actually find it quite overwhelming at that point. But I think that Discord works best when it's a relatively small group of people and you can have fun conversations with each other. You can thread out the conversations so that you can talk about AI news versus general stuff versus Tesla news, things like that. So that's where Discord shines. But you could see how an eventual Twitter could be designed such that it had smaller groups. So again, the Twitter circles, but a 2.0 version of this thing where you had smaller groups of people. The big advantage of Discord is the threaded conversations. And that's something that Twitter really needs to work on if they want to compete with an entity like Discord, because what they need is that you can have these smaller groups. So again, sort of some Twitter circles kind of thing, but within that you would have multiple threads that you could carry on conversations with. And it was an invitation type of situation so that you could reduce the number of people on that and make it much more fun and very, very rapid fire, energetic, interactive, that kind of a thing. And then we get to Teams, and I'm not nearly as much of a big time user of Teams as other people are, I'm sure, but basically Teams is attempting to do kind of a mashup of Slack and Zoom. So I'll sort of throw it in that category. So if Twitter/X can disrupt Zoom and Slack, it can also disrupt Teams. So does Twitter/X have the possibility of disrupting all of these entities? Yes, it certainly does. From the functionality standpoint, it is still missing a whole bunch of things, primarily things like better video integration for disrupting YouTube, better conference call integration for disrupting things like Zoom and Teams, better threaded conversations to disrupt things like Slack and Discord. But it is quite possible that Twitter/X could eventually create something that has maybe mini apps within it or something that you don't really notice they're mini apps, but essentially you just click on something that's like a Zoom call and it creates an interface that makes it easy to have that type of interaction with other people. As for the usability, one thing that's advantageous for these individual apps is that they have been designed to do these things. And you can see some of the problems with going outside your core functionality with an app like Zoom, where there are other functions that are supposed to be disruptive to like Slack or Teams or something. They just don't function as well as their core functionality of doing video conference calls. So the danger for Twitter is if it attempts to disrupt the usability of all these other apps that have been designed very specifically to do things, it could become just a mess. An interface mess where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. There's no clarity to my interactions with the application, and that would cause big, big problems. Is that overcomable? Can you get over that? Yes. With good engineering and especially good user interface design, you could absolutely overcome that. But Twitter would have to be very, very careful about this as they move forward. It seems like they are doing that. They're trying to roll out video in particular in a reasonably thoughtful way and roll out the functionality and make it really integrated into the Twitter application itself. So I think that they definitely have the chops to do this. Is it easy? No, that's the reason why we have a whole bunch of apps instead of just one. But can they do it? Absolutely. They could indeed get the usability up to the quality of these very focused apps. And if they can do that, remember, we don't have to context switch anymore because it's all in one application. So is this Elon Musk's vision? Absolutely. We're also going to throw in banking and other things like that, I am sure. But in terms of these social media types of entities, that's clearly in the wheelhouse of exactly why Elon Musk purchased Twitter. And that brings me to the last topic, which is culture and buy-in for these apps. And what I mean by that is, who is the audience for these applications, for YouTube, for Slack, for Zoom, etc.? Who are the audience? Who are the people, the demographics they're going after? And does Twitter have access to those demographics? So in terms of Slack and Teams and Zoom, I would say absolutely. Twitter has a tendency to attract business people. It has a tendency to attract older people. I think it has a lot of younger people, but it does tend to skew older, I believe, in the demographics. I haven't looked at it very, very specifically, but it feels that way to me. But that could just be the fact that I'm older, and so therefore I tend to gravitate towards more mature people, I guess. But certainly I talk to a lot of younger people on Twitter as well. So anyway, that's the type of demographic that Twitter has, and I believe that that works really, really well for things like Zoom and Slack and Teams, particularly. Does it have the same audience as YouTube? I don't believe so. I think that YouTube's audience is bigger, and even though my particular audience skews older, it has a lot of younger audience members. And that's of course one of the reasons why YouTube has Shorts, because it's trying to compete with things like TikTok and Instagram Reels. And those are other apps that I didn't talk about particularly here. I don't tend to use them that much myself, but Twitter does need to contend with the TikTok world as well. They need the very rapid fire vertical, format videos that people have that they do on TikTok and Instagram. And of course, just like YouTube, Twitter will have to figure out how to monetize that to make it worthwhile for the large scale content creators. And of course, as TikTok and Instagram Reels tend to skew younger, so does Discord. Again, it has that energy, it has that youthful vibe and everything. And I think that's going to be the place where the audience for Twitter is a little bit lacking. And so probably Discord is going to be one of the most difficult things for Twitter to disrupt. And it's not because of the functionality, because again, Discord and Twitter have an incredible amount of overlap in terms of their paradigms and the way that they operate, but Discord just has a different culture. And again, it's more like TikTok and Instagram. And so my personal prediction is that that is going to be the market that Twitter is going to have the most difficult time breaking into, and it's going to take the longest amount of time for Twitter to get there. Now, can they get there? Absolutely. They just have to keep growing their audience, and they have to grow their audience downward into the younger demographic by creating quality competition for things like TikTok and Instagram and Discord. So to wrap this up, the danger for an app like Twitter is that it can become too defocused, and it could just become like a blob that you don't understand how to interact with, and it's too complicated to interact with, etc. if it tries to go after all of these markets. The advantages, of course, are that we get much better usability, we get no context switching between doing our different tasks every day, and we also get better searchability. We know where all of our conversations and our videos and our history is. It's all in that one application. So if Twitter/X manages to overcome the diffusion problem and the usability problem, X truly could become one app to rule them all. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do like it so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. If you're watching it on Twitter, just like it, follow, do whatever you want there. As always, a huge shout out to my Patreon patrons, my YouTube channel members, and my new Twitter subscribers. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel in any way that you can. I truly do appreciate it. And if you want to join any of the teams, just check out the links in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a car, a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.